We are thrilled, as always, to have the Florida version. So I don't know what's happened here, Scott Walter. You are now wearing the Hawaiian shirts, and look at me. I mean, what's going?
Yeah. Yesterday was Taco Tuesday, and today is like, Hawaiian Wednesday, I guess.
I see.
I'm on your show, of course.
All right. So Scott and I have talked about it, and we think we're going to shoot for one time a week, maybe on Wednesdays, kind of like we have Brian White on Mondays and Tuesdays most of the time, and then Scott maybe most of the time on Wednesday, because what we think, let's face it, the robots is the biggest deal. It's the biggest deal at Tesla. It's the biggest deal in the world in terms of potential. And I think it deserves its own spot each week, just as a review of what's taking place, especially since we got so many folks that are getting into the game. It seems like every day, every week, we're having another announcement of somebody that we were unaware of that's actually producing something that has some skills. I know 1X,
Yes.
it's not a small, it's not an underfunded business by any stretch of the imagination.
No, it's not. And again, when you first kind of proposed we do this weekly a while back, it's like, I mean, come on, there's not that much activity going on there. Maybe once a month. And now it just turns out that, yeah, there's a lot coming out every week. And last week, 1X, which is, they've been around a while. I think they've been like maybe 2016, 2018. So they're not a new company, and they do have some funding. And I think they even received some funding from OpenAI about a year ago, which made the headlines at that point that like, oh, they're investigating that. So OpenAI is looking at embodied intelligence. So they released another video last week showing a little bit more of the evolution of their bots. And I think it's worth a bit of a breakdown to look at it, because let's remember this space is getting pretty busy. There's a lot of other players out there, and each week there's probably going to be another announcement from one of them to look at that's worth kind of breaking down, understand what they're doing and what kind of progress is being made. And if everyone did not see it, I will try to share.
Yeah, and one of the aspects of doing this once a week, I don't spend a lot of time talking about the competition to the Tesla vehicles. I don't think that they're quite as important, but in the robot space, what we're talking about is breaking technology, where the tech is just so fast moving, both on the software and the hardware sides. So to that extent, I think this is why doing this weekly and looking at the competition for what they're doing that's advancing the entire category, I think is what we're going to try to do.
Yes. And what I want to do is I want to give a shout out to Tesla Bot Journal. He's on X and has been growing, I think, his following pretty quickly, because he does a very good job of kind of summarizing a lot of the developments in the humanoid bot space.
Yeah.
And a lot of times these things come to my attention through him more than directly.
Exactly.
So shout out to him, kind of keeping me informed.
Absolutely.
And so this is the 1X. And I always get the name 1X confused. I was thinking, is it X1 or something like that? Now I realize the way to remember it is because they said that the speed of the video is at 1X.
Yes.
So that's really easy mnemonic to be able to keep it in your head. Now, let's go through it. And Randy, you kind of tell me what you see going on in here.
The other thing that I noticed was, of course, that it was on rollers as opposed to being bipedal. So those were the two keys. And then the third thing, which you and I actually talked about last week, was that this looks like what I envisioned, and I think you envisioned would be happening over at Tesla, is that there would be all these bots at all these stations learning all these things.
Right.
And maybe hundreds, maybe thousands of them doing that. And that's what it's not hundreds or thousands, at least we don't know, but at least there's a dozen or a couple of dozen that are all working at different stations, learning different tasks.
Yes. Now, so the first thing that popped in my head was probably when it's like, wow, how many? Because you can see there's definitely a lot there. And of course they're on wheels, and this is their first generation Eve. They're coming up with another generation called Neo, which I think will be doing walking. And the reason I pause right here is because there's a ramp here. So they're showing it doesn't have to be a perfectly flat floor. Yeah. It can't go upstairs, but at least can go up ramps. So if you're in a work environment that does not really require you to go upstairs or is reasonably flat, it will be able to operate. The other thing most people notice is over here, they thought the bots were over at the treadmill working out.
Yeah,
and of
right.
course, this is a charging station we're going to see. And so we can see they're doing some operations. And yeah, the first thing to say, they're on wheels. And it's almost like they're more or less on a snowboard, in that they have legs, but the legs are kind of like the feet are in there and they can't move them. However, as we will see, they are able to adjust their height. So when they plug themselves in and out, occasionally they will have to reach down to get it. The other thing, so right there, you see it's able to go down and stick the charger in on its own. So it can reach down low. There's a lot of them going in here, going into different rooms, different activities going in the rooms. And again, you're right. This is what we expected. It's like, oh, you're going to need lots of bots to be able to train all these different operations. And I'm going to circle back on that after we look at this. Now, the hands, of course, you see are more or less claws as opposed to fully developed hands. But again, the next generation that they're working on, Neo, they just released something the other day showing it grabbing a cup of coffee with like fully formed hands.
Okay.
So what they're concerned about here in their first generation, I think they see themselves as kind of also an AI company. They're trying to solve this as from an AI point of view. And so, yeah, there's some shortcuts because part of doing the embodiment is navigation. And walking is hard, but you still have to navigate. In other words, you have to plan where you want to go, and then you have to then say, all right, now go there. And if going there means walking, then you would have something for being able to do it. Or the other thing, of course, is you just use the wheels. And the wheels will have some advantages in some cases over the normal bipedal robots in some cases. And again, I'm going to discuss why one is going to be better over the other. Now, the first thing here is that as you go through here, you start getting lost. I was trying to make the mental map in there and count how many bots I saw.
Right.
Now, I think I counted 24, but I think I may have double counted a couple. Okay. So there's no more than 24 that I kind of saw, but I suspect a few of them may have been double counted. So it could be somewhere between 20 and 20 or something like that. So it's not 100, but it's still more than, 2, 3, or a dozen.
And I think, I think that point too that I wanted to make, Scott, was that this makes it apparent that it's not too expensive to have 24.
Right.
And if it's not too expensive to have 24, it's not too expensive for Tesla to have 100. I mean, that was a lot of the conversation that was going on was, oh, well, possibly they cost $50,000 or $100,000 a piece to build at this level. I don't think so.
Yeah, exactly. So for that, because you don't have to worry about walking, and we can see that they're able to self-charge. I think in some cases they were actually plugged in a couple of stations. So yeah, I mean, that's one way of being able to extend the battery life depending on what you do, but sometimes you have to be mobile. So we can see they can do that. The one thing that was rather interesting is that some of the early tasks, you'll notice it's picking up something and then having to turn pretty quickly to go somewhere else. And of all the bipedal robots I've seen out there, not only are they walking slow, and I think it was Tesla Hype did a really funny post last night that he showed a clip of the Tesla bot walking that we saw from was it a week or 2 weeks ago? Basically the naked Optimus, without the armor on. And it was kind of walking slowly. And he said, it's like leaving the gym after leg day, and it kind of was. It's like walking pretty slowly, looking maybe a little bit stiff. So all of them don't seem to be quick enough. And whenever I've seen them having to change direction, they are really slowly. I mean, it's like the feet are just like going pitter patter, trying to get around. And that could be the killer. I mean, if you can walk 3 miles per hour, that's great. But if every time you have to turn 45 degrees or 90 degrees, it takes you like,
yeah.
So the bot on the wheels was like able to like turn around pretty quickly. So in some ways they were able to get that task faster. The other thing, of course, there's going to be a lot of energy savings to have a mobility like that. So there are some advantages. Some of the disadvantages are sometimes not that easy to crouch down. You see, they've been able to do that. And it has been argued, and I think pretty effectively by Brett Adcock, that figure that, these wheeled ones won't be able to work in a lot of environments because sometimes if you need to reach into something, you need to get your foot up to get the balance. And a lot of times you're getting your foot up on a pallet or something like that. So even though there's not like steps in the environment, there just may be these other things that makes more sense. So his argument for like the more general purpose one is that they have to be bipedal. Right. It doesn't mean there won't be some of these solutions. And the other thing is that they're already pivoting to trying to get a bipedal robot.
Right.
And they've been around long enough, since I think, like I say, 2016. The whole thing is like, how do you teach these things? And going in and trying to get the data and learning to do it. And they're saying everything there was end to end.
Right.
And you see a variety of different tasks. The Sisyphean task of like picking up the block, putting it up there, and it slides back down again and again. And of course, every time it comes down, it's like in a random position. And then maybe there's something about putting it in one, changing the box going in, but whatever. They're trying to get the training set. So that's some of the stuff that we've learned from them, and the importance of doing that. Now, some other information that came out is that I had the pleasure last week of being able to participate in 2 interviews with Suzanne Gilder of Sanctuary AI, first
Right.
with Herbert, and then with John. And it was like really interesting to hear her discussing, some of the issues of training and AI and embodiment and what they're doing and why they're attacking the way they are. And it may seem a little bit different than the others, but the most important discussion we had kind of with John was really talking about the different ways that you can do training of the bots. One is you do simulation, which we know is very important. You've looked at all the AI out there, and it's all about simulating these agents and replicating them, millions of times and doing millions of different operations. And eventually they start solving these rather complex problems. And so it's very easy to do inside of a computer. It's much harder to do in reality. So you need to come up with these environments that are simulatable. And then once you get that, you can start to bring it into the bot. The other way of getting some of your training data is to do it telerobotically. Because telerobotically, you're kind of operating in the real world. You're getting some data from that. And then there's like the reinforcement learning where the bot is put in the real world and now is trying to learn the tasks themselves, like we see what 1X is doing.
Right.
But you've got to start somewhere. I mean, you just can't give the bot like an empty neural net and just like, oh, okay, do that. You've got to get something up to a certain level, some innate capabilities, because we're born with innate capabilities, right?
Right.
Without that, we can't learn anything. So we already have some functionality, and then we're able to learn on top of that. So you need the same thing. And so that usually comes from like either the telerobotic or the simulation environment. And then you give it to the bot, and then it's now going to interact the real world. Well, simulations are never perfect. They are close, but you need that. And the question is, when do you get your, I guess, the physical encapsulation or the mechanics to a state that you're comfortable enough that, yeah, that's the version of the bot that we want to make 1,000 of,
Right.
because it's going to scale up and train. And you don't want to be halfway through and realize your mechanism is completely wrong, or you need more sensors or something else. And one of the things
Less
that
or fewer sensors.
Yeah, right. Now to kind of explain what's going on with simulation is that you need good physics. That's what it really comes down to.
Mhm.
And without good physics, you're not going to get the same feedback. And so you've got to get all that information that comes back to you in a form that tells you what the bot is going to really experience in the world, so that it knows when it, my famous grabbing the bottle, coming over and grabbing the bottle, it really knows what it's going to feel like. And trying to simulate that is a lot trickier than you think. So there are these simulation, or say these physics engines that have been around for a while. I mean, Nvidia is kind of famous for it. The first they came out with the GPUs that made graphics really fast, so gaming looked like realistic. But part of what was like missing from gaming in the early days is that you didn't really have good physics. That, if you drop something, it'll like fall to the table, and maybe didn't drop at all. It kind of stayed up there. Or if you threw something, it just didn't obey the laws of physics. So you wanted to make it convincing. And they have these physics engines. And these physics engines are Newtonian physics, okay? It's not relativistic. It's not doing quantum or something like that. It's doing like your basic physics 101 stuff. And it's a lot harder than you think, because when you took physics 101, you might remember like you tried to do the ballistic equation or something like that. And all the questions you had on that was like, you're on the moon and you throw a ball, and the reason why there is like, they're hoping you're like, oh, you're on the moon, you're in a vacuum. Okay. So you can apply this thing, because in the real world, when you throw a ball, you've got drag and everything else, and it's nonlinear. It's really hard to solve. So you try to make it as simple as possible. The point I'm trying to drive home here is that the real world physics gets really, really messy. And that when they try adding in the gains, they're taking lots of shortcuts. And the physics engine, that's what it's called. It's got a funny spelling with like an X at the end, that's inside of the GPU that Nvidia has, is this great accelerator that allows you to simulate physics a lot faster. But they take lots and lots of shortcuts. The real problem with physics is that I always think of physics as, oh, that's F equals ma, right? And that's the easy part, okay? the hard part of any sort of physics is actually looking at the interaction between different bodies and knowing where they hit. So you got to find the point of contact and the directions they're coming in. And once you know that, now you can apply F equals ma. Okay. So the problem is really more of a collision detection problem, which they're doing, where you've got these objects that are kind of moving, which means you have to have your steps. So you have to go in and kind of predict where it's going to happen, get that, figure out where the point or points of contact are from that, figure it out. Then you got to think about, like, what's the restitution of the material? What's the shape of the material? What's kind of friction is there? I mean, there's all these parameters you got to put in there, and you can put them in and they're like a close approximation of reality, but they're not a perfect one. And the first thing you'll find in all these physics engines is that you'll have some object like this beautifully sculpted bottle like this. And it will ask you, it's like, do you want to use the full representation? Because if you do, it's going to be really hard.
Yeah.
Can we approximate it with a cylinder? Is that okay? It's like, whoa, wait a minute. Or what they would call like a polyhedron, that, so that they'll do some sort of convex hull over it. So a lot of the objects that you actually have in there, they have had to dumb them down just to be able to make that calculation, because it's very, very, very hard. All right. So it's very convincing in a game simulator because you can take those cheats. But when you start doing it, it was like, oh, I want to teach my robot what it's like to grab this thing, and you don't really get the properties of this thing right, it's going to be very, very hard. And this is one of the things that Suzanne announced, that, what they've been able to already do at Sanctuary is what they call like one-shot learning, where in some instances, they're able to train their bot in the simulation engine. And then when they bring it out to the bot, it works first time. That's what I mean by one shot. Normally what happens is you get a close approximation, and then you got to do the reinforcement learning, and you've got to do a lot of iteration and collect that data to get it. But, the caveat is it works for certain objects, like very, like a square solid block,
Right.
not for squishy stuff yet. And the problem is, as you point out, is because the physics isn't good enough. We just don't know how to model a squishy thing. So if you've got like a solid ball, it'll probably be perfect the first time. But if it's like a Nerf ball, which is almost the same shape, it may not, because it's kind of squishy. And unless you model that correctly, it's just not going to work. So these are the challenges that you have. And then you want to make sure everything works well. Now, the other that is interesting about the discussion with her is that realizing that everyone is coming to sometimes the same conclusions or different conclusions, or going off in different directions. And if you listen closely to some of the interviews that Brett Adcock did, you'll see there's a lot of alignment with also some of the decisions and ideas that Tesla came up with, but also some slightly different conclusions. And then everyone's getting out there and then changing direction a little bit. So the first thing Tesla did is, and it's described in Isaacson's book, I think this is really, really funny, where they all get in there to discuss, oh, we got to build hands like that. Like, how many fingers should it be? Should it be 3 or 4 or whatever, and all that discussion. And then at one point they realized, like, oh my God, it's like, they got to, how are we going to test the, the pressure and stuff like that? We're going to need sensors. They realize they not only get to apply pressure, but they get to feel pressure. Like this revelation. It's like, yeah, you have to. And then thinking about putting sensors in there. And then we're like, well, no, wait a minute. Maybe we can do it with a back EMF from that. So they scrapped the idea and said, we think we can do it without it. And I think they have a good shot of doing it without it. And James Domel also felt the same way. That's like, the back EMF may be enough. You get it in your control system. Figure was the other way around. They immediately put the sensors in there, and now they're like,
maybe we don't
need them, because they said they did some of these stuff, and they're like, you know what, we think we don't need them. So it's really interesting that Tesla kind of went the other way and said, we think it will help. Suzanne gives us a little bit of highlight in there, because she's convinced that you need to kind of copy the human sensorium as closely as possible.
Right. That was I thought one of her. Yeah.
Yes, she's very, and she also, and the interesting is that I thought it was fascinating, fascinating that their bot can do this.
Yeah.
Other bots can't, because they have this motion in the fingers, not just that. So they have an extra degree of freedom that they can control. And I kind of laughingly said that, because they are doing a lot of telerobotics for that. So the way they kind of teach it is that they would have a teleoperator do it. So I knew, it's like, your bot can do it, but I wonder if the teleoperator can.
I know, yeah.
Some people can't. So again, you're limited. And then, because the other thing they found out is that in many cases for the telerobotics, they didn't quite have the correct range of motion. So sometimes the operator was getting more range of motion than they have. So I have to change that a little bit to be able to get that. And another reason that they have like the full head movement, that they added the 3rd degree of freedom that the others took out, because it's almost like, is that kind of necessary? And part of it is that it may help in teleoperation. It also just gives the robot, more emotion, and people will relate to it a bit more. So there's good arguments in that. But the other thing is that they're having also an internal argument in Sanctuary of, well, do we need that degree of freedom?
Uh-huh.
And so they're sitting there arguing in there, and she's just like, well, let's find out. Let's run a test. That's the only way. So she's being very scientific and saying, let's go out because they can lock that degree of freedom. Same thing that Figure's able to do. They went through it and said, let's turn off the sensors. Let's see if we can do it without the sensors. So it's glad to see that they're experimenting with these things, and everyone's trying to figure it out. And they're going to take different approaches, and they'll come to different conclusions, or maybe they come to the same eventually. So it's really interesting to look in that space to see what they're doing.
And Scott, one of the things I think that Susan said, maybe I'm wrong, maybe it was another video, but in terms of the simulations, that they have a bridge between the simulation and the bot. I forget what they called that, but like maybe some hard coding that moves the simulation into something the bot understands.
Okay. So yeah, I think we were going down a little bit of a rabbit hole there. Is that we do this all the time. I say, okay, Randy, touch your nose, right? Yeah. Okay. Now what you've done is that you've taken what I've said and you've turned it into like touch nose. And then from there, your body has figured out how to translate that into all the nervous signals to go up to there. And that's kind of what you have to do, is that you tell the bot at a very high level, and then they want to transfer that into what the bot actually has to do, which is why they are modeling everything down to all the servos, the torques that they're going to have, any sort of forces, all that they want to model in there, and know, currents. You're talking about everything. So what you're doing is you're taking that concept and then turning it into everything that's needed to actually do the action. And that's being done through a neural net, because you didn't say, oh, your elbow has to be at 32 degrees,
right,
and your shoulder is, you just you get this sense, you get this feeling. So that's the same idea, is take a command and translate it into it, and trying to tokenize the whole problem. And part of what I was discussing was that you've got, in many cases, so you've got an infinite number of possibilities, right? Just like there's like an infinite number of combinations that we can do with our alphabet.
Sure.
But there's only, if you apply certain rules of a certain language, there's only certain ways the letters are really allowed to come together. You have to have vowels every now and then, so all these other kind of things. And then of course, there's the other thing, there's the day-to-day use. So English, we have about 500,000 words, something like that. If you look, depending on which dictionary you go in, you're going to have like all the chemical names and all these other weird names, but still there's a lot. However, in day usage, people use maybe 500 words.
Right.
So what it means is and this is something, this is pretty much what's known as Benfords Law, is that you can look at, there's always this things that have high frequency and things that have low frequencies. Same with letters. I mean, there's certain letters that are used more common and others not. That's why you have like the Scrabble points, right?
Yeah.
There's some one letter, what is it? 1 point letters, and then some that, what's the biggest one? 10 points or something?
8 or 10, yeah.
8 or 10. And it all has to come down with how commonly it's used. And so when you start realizing that we have certain gestures and postures that we go into, there's no need to have to train the infinite possibility of where we are. You just kind of start looking. It's like, well, this is the stuff that's more common that you get done. There are other things you have to do to make things more human. So I asked her the famous question, and I got a chance to kind of ask her twice. So we get kind of different nuance on if you had to add a joint or take a joint away. And that, one of them is that the arm is a 7-degree freedom arm. All of them are doing a 7-degree freedom. Tesla first started out with only a 6-degree freedom arm. They realized they needed the 7th. And they all basically have an extra axis in the shoulder that if you were to be making an industrial arm that you would get rid of. But because the human arm has that kind of redundancy there, you got to put it in there to make it more humanoid. And then the question was like, do you need full mobility in the wrist? And her answer is like, yeah, we do. And not only that, we're not getting enough of the metacarpal. And I was like kind of surprised, like, you don't have that much, because the humans don't have that much, but evidently some of their operators probably are able to get like way over like that. So they need to capture that information. Now, the reason you need to have the redundancy up here in the shoulder is so that you don't pick up a box like this
Mm-hmm.
and like this or like that. And I know this for sure because when we were making like our avatar models in our simulation to have humans going around, and we were like solving it first as like a 6-axis problem, every time the human picked up a box, they were walking around like this, and they just like look really stupidly. Oh no, we're gonna make it a 7-degree of freedom arm. And even then, the rules for doing that were really complicated because sometimes, oh, now we can do whatever we want with the elbows, and like suddenly, like they're walking around like this, like, well, that's not human life. And trying to figure out the ideal solution for that is not simple when you do it heuristically. But then if you get enough teaching and training of that in there, eventually, it begins to realize that this makes this a bit better. Now, one problem they're going to have, and I think she was talking about some of the issues they had with motion planning, is that when you do motion planning heuristically, you're trying to optimize for something. A lot of times you're trying to optimize what's the most efficient way to be able to move from here to there.
Right.
And unfortunately, and this is a problem I have with all of the designs out there, they are not really accurate to the way humans are articulated. They're taking some engineering shortcuts because like it's the most practical way to do it.
Right.
And the result is what is efficient for the bot to move its arm is very different than what is for a human. So when you go through there, the bot's really going to want to put its arm up or do some other silly things that just do not look right.
Uh-huh.
And again, if they're going to operate around humans, you want to make sure it's like if a guy is walking around like this with his arms out there, it's like, you're a total jerk, guy. Get your elbows down. You're going to bump into someone. So we have these social norms of what's going on and expectations of what people are going to do when you're interacting near them. So if the human bot is coming up and is not behaving human-like in its motions, people are going to be a little bit wary. So you need to capture that information to make sure it's correct. In some cases, it may not be the optimal strategy for that movement, but it's the one that is socially acceptable if you're going to be working around humans in some way. So these are things that come up, and my big beef is like the way the shoulder is done. And it's because, they just stacked 3 servos on top of each other, basically, to get the 3 degrees of freedom. And that's not how our human anatomy is. It's like we've got a ball and socket joint there, okay, that has these certain degrees of freedom. And we have these different ligaments that actuate it in a particular way. So the way the actuation is done and the way you would use the solution space is completely different. They just do not map on top of one another, even though you'd say kinematically they seem to be similar because I have the same, I have a certain point here where I can move in all 3 degrees of freedom. There's like, yeah, you can do it in both of them, but the way you're doing it is so different. Your strategy, solution strategy is going to be very different. So that's a little bit tricky to do because it's possible that they have some range of motions in the bot that's actually not possible for a human because, our ligaments will just kind of prevent us from being able to do it, or depending on how flexible you are, it's gonna be something a bit different. Yeah.
So Scott, I'm kind of curious because between you and John have had lots and lots of videos together and talk in addition to the videos. Between John's background in doing animation and your background in actually doing the robotics themselves on the factory floor, have both of your opinions changed over the last 3 months as not only Optimus has matured, but also as you've seen all of these other companies and had these other interviews? Has your opinion changed with regard to the difficulty of, for instance, marrying the hardware to the software, or vice versa, the software to the hardware? Is it become more complex than you thought it was? Is there major differences in the way that you see directionally what has to be done to get there?
There's nuance in there, but I see the progress is it's one of those things. Sometimes you're expecting the progress to be in this direction and it ends up being in that direction. So it looks like there have been some pretty impressive advances more in the intelligence side. And this is, I was starting to notice that, and certainly Brett pointed that out. He was like, oh my God, it's like, we thought it was going to take a long time for the AI to be able to do some of the stuff, and that we would have the mechanics ready way before.
Right.
The mechanics seems to be a little bit lagging. I'm kind of disappointed on the bipedal motion. It's looking good, but it's still, they got to double, if not triple, the speeds of them. And again, I'm concerned walking corners and a few other things, what that's going to be like. So it seems like that there is it hasn't come ahead fast enough. And it may be that there's some little issues they're trying to get through. And that might also be something that they're going to solve more with AI, because it seemed like Tesla may have been using heuristics for the walking, but using the AI for the upper part, and then doing a refocus on that. So it'll be interesting to see over the next coming months how quickly that goes. And that could be part of the reason why they're not building 1,000 of them yet to do the training, because they're not quite there. There's going to be probably more develops in the area of physics, and like, again, improving that so the simulations will become better and better. I still think that by the end of the year, the robots will be doing useful work, meaning that, they are definitely going to be showing that they are able to do certain tasks in a structured environment at the same efficiency as a human, and that you could probably, work out the figures to say, and it'll probably cost less.
Right.
Or the same. All you need is like the cost parity. So obviously if it costs like 10 times more, you're not going to do it. You're only going to do that at first because it's part of an R&D. But if you can see a clear path that, yeah, we're going to be able to get there, you will see it. So there'll be some operations that'll be able to, and the thing is, it's going to be funny because, the obvious way to do useful work is to go after the higher paying jobs, right?
Right.
Because if they're getting paid $50 an hour over there,
right,
and you can do that, man, that's like right away you got it. But the challenge, it might be more too challenging for the bot to do it. So it's going to have to do the one that might be like the $15 or $25 job. And that way the human becomes more competitive. And then it's a little bit harder to do displacement. So, but usually that means task complexity. So CERN talks about sort of wage being a proxy for the complexity of a task. But sometimes, you could be fooled that there may be something that you need to pay someone a lot for, but it turns out it's a lot easier to do than some other that is like actually very difficult to do. And would be a lot harder. So it's a rule of thumb more than anything else.
Yeah, no, there's definitely, I could see that even in my own factory, is that I paid way more money for a machine operator than I did for somebody to cap bombs. And the machine operator was doing less work and less complicated work, except that he or she needed to be aware of the machine making errors, or the machine needing grease, or, things that the person putting caps on the bottle, they just needed to really pick up a bottle, put a cap on, and move it along. But it's a more complex robotic task.
Now there's another little side is like, at some point I want to come back to the $50 an hour job. And but before we do that,
well, maybe that might have to be the next show. We're down to, you have a hard cut in about 5 minutes. So
I can go over like a couple minutes. So don't worry. So what I want to do here is, I think because we've talked about the term proprioception a lot. So now what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to find the Zoom share button here, and then we're just going to go ahead and share. We'll go ahead and do this. And, being out in California, you may have been aware of this shot.
Yeah.
All right. Now, what that is what I call basically proprioception taken to the extreme.
Right.
And now the whole idea of proprioception is that is our awareness of where our body parts are. So it's this thing, like I say, close my eyes right now and I can touch my nose.
Right.
Okay. And I can touch my ear, and I can do all these things because we're well aware of that. And at the same time, I can kind of close my eyes and I know somewhere over here is the bottle. Okay. Because I just had a glimpse at it and I kind of know where it is.
Right.
And you can do this thing at home. And of course, the other thing that's interesting is sometimes things will become an extension of our body. So if I know I'm holding this bottle, I can close my eyes and still bring it right to my mouth and over to my ear. It's almost like I know where the end of that is, even though my eyes are closed. So it's that sense of proprioception. And then if you go into a room you're really familiar in and you sit down on the couch and close your eyes, you can take crumped up pieces of paper and start making the shots, and you'll get kind of close to where everything is. And then, of course, if I blindfold you and spin you around outside and bring you in and sit you down in your favorite chair in the living room, even then you can do it without taking the blindfold off because you're so familiar with the environment.
Right.
And so what's going on here is like Steph Curry has like this unbelievable worldview.
Right.
that his internal world model is such high fidelity. He almost doesn't have to see the basket and he can
Right.
still hit a 3-pointer, right? So that is what we're talking about when we're talking about, the simulation, and what these bots are doing is they are going to have a mental image of their world that is so good that
Yeah.
even when something's out of sight, they're going to kind of know where it is, and it allows them to plan. So the bot is, in a sense, closing its eyes and planning what something is going to do. It's getting an idea of what everything's going to be like, and then from that, when it goes and executes it, it kind of finds out from that.
Yeah.
So
So,
yeah, I thought that would just be kind
so
of a
that,
fun little aside.
so that is part of what we're talking about when we say that, as opposed to training the bot to go out and do one specific task where he's in a very confined space, it is in a very confined space and doing one specific task over and over again, that could be done today. But what
Yes.
Tesla and some of the others appear that they're trying to do is provide this kind of environmental awareness, this general capability,
Right.
so that they can
And
be.
you can only do certain things. Again, one of the things that Suzanne talked when we were talking about, like, things being solid and easy to do in physics versus squishy,
Right.
is like fabric. T-shirts are
Yeah.
just, that's really hard to simulate in physics. There's people that are doing it, but still getting it right is going to be very tough. So those are going to be things that are going to be very difficult to one shot from a simulation into it. And it's just going to be something that enough training data, the bots will be able to figure it out eventually, of what the expectation is and how they need to self-correct. Because the Kirk demo that Figure did was this idea of self-correction, of like, oh, that's not quite going the way we want. What do we need to do? Adjust it.
Well,
And that's, like, I think most of what I've got on here. I mean, the only thing is that, we talked about, the idea of a $50 a job. If somebody's being paid $50, that's something that you would like to replace with a bot if possible, especially if it's easy enough. And so you have a California politician running for sort of higher office that wants to institute a federal
Barbara Lee.
federal minimum wage of $50 an hour. And it was like, whoa. I mean, first of all, what's that going to do? And I suggest, in part of it is, it's like, this way people have a chance to succeed because they get quite the living wage, no doubt about it, assuming anyone's going to hire them.
Right.
So I tongue in cheek decided that what Congress should call this legislation is Better Opportunities to Succeed Act. Okay. Known as the Bots Act.
The Bots Act.
Yes. And I didn't say who was going to help to succeed.
Right. Yes.
And, kind of implied in there, it's like, right there, you are just going to put everyone out of work right away at that kind of, as well as what it's going to do to the economy. So what it means is that I don't think the legislators or who are doing this stuff are even aware of what's going on in the bot space. They think it's like, oh, we can pay everyone $50 and, like, there's no way they can replace it because you need human labor. It's like, you better start looking. So if you don't want to have a huge disruption in the economy, you've got to look at it. Now, I'm not trying to be so callous and stuff like that to say that, oh, the bots are going to, let's just wipe out labor completely. No. That's not the thing. Is it's always been the 3Ds, the dirty, the dangerous, and the dull, right? And or the other way I like to see is, like, the only jobs that are going to really be replaced are the unfilled, and we've got millions of them that are unfilled, and the unfulfilling. In other words, the jobs people do not want to do.
Right.
All right.
Right.
And in many cases, that, the two are almost the same. Part of the reason they're unfilled is because people just don't want to do them.
Right.
Or there's just a plain shortage. It's just not enough people out there to do it. And I've got some ideas of how you would go about that to make sure that if someone really wants to do that job, we should let them. It's like, if that's what it is, and you're willing to pay, you some wage minimum that we would have, then that would be fair. So we're not kicking people out, because a lot of people want to work.
Yes.
Yes. And it should be that you want to work, not because you need to work, right? So let's
Well,
make
I don't
sure
know about that. That's a whole nother philosophy.
Right. But part of it should be is that, no, what I'm saying is that, people get so desperate. The reason why they take that job is they need to take that job.
Right.
Okay. And you'd want to get them to a level that it's like they're doing these jobs not because they're desperate for the stuff,
right,
because they really like it. Okay. So, I mean, think about, farming or doing something like that. There are people that love working in their gardens. A lot of people say, oh, that's hard work. That's labor. It's like, yeah, it is hard work. It's labor. I love going out there and doing it. We're not going to say you can't do that anymore. So if people want to do physical labor and that they get enjoyment and pleasure out of it and a sense of well-being, no, you don't replace them. But the problem is, I tried to have work in my house. I've had neighbors that tried to have work and stuff like that. They can't find people. There's just like this huge labor shortage. So what are you going to do to be able to kind of fill that gap in? And that's where the robots are really designed. And looking at the numbers and the statistics and some stuff that CERN Basher has run with his models,
Right.
I am way more sanguine about what it's going to look like going forward. I don't think the robots are going to be replacing labor. They're going to be displacing it a little bit, which means they'll be able to, those places that are unfilled will now get filled in. And the other places that are unfilled, the labor force will be able to kind of move over there because there's such a labor shortage. And the time that the bots come online is not going to be like that.
Yes.
It's going to be up,
Yes.
but it's more or less like we've got a decade to a decade and a half before it really kind of gets that level. And that's more than enough time. Plus, at that point, the economy is going to reshape itself so much
Right.
that most of these things are going to be moot points. They're going to look back and say, well, what are they all worried about? I mean, it's like everything kind of would fine, but I could understand that if somehow we were able to turn on the spigot tomorrow and suddenly have 1 billion bots, wow, that's going to be a real social upheaval. But what it really is, the bots are going to arrive barely in time to start filling the labor force issues we have already, because there's already a shortage. And I'm amazed that the economy is still operating, given the fact there's so many job shortages and that inflation isn't even higher than it is, given the fact that, I mean, if you just don't have enough people out there doing stuff, then obviously the cost of goods and services are going to go up. And sure, it does. I mean, you try to get some work done in your house, you're going to be paying a lot more than you thought, because the contractors are like, yeah, I got 10 people that need me. And I only have enough capacity for 2.
Yep. So I want to leave you with one last thought that I had last night, and I haven't heard anybody else talking about this before. So maybe you've thought about it, but it occurred to me, as these bots become more generally capable, where they feel they have their environment in mind, and they're able to be trained on new jobs and maybe begin to actually improve, do their own improvement of a task that better than what they were trained to do. And all these things start happening, that they won't have any emotional feeling about any of that. They won't be feeling negatively about the fact that, oh, I'm not sure I can do that. They won't be going, oh boy, I now I can go tell the boss. They won't be going.
Well, I don't know about, I mean, it's like ChatGPT tells me all the time, oh, I can't do that.
Right.
So, I don't know. It has a bad attitude sometimes. Grok will also say it can't do it, but at least it'll be more like SpongeBob. It'll be like, really optimistic and happy. It won't be like Squidward. Oh, I don't want to do that. So,
but we won't have to overcome these reluctances on the part of employees to move to the next level, or feelings that, oh, I'm a terrible employee. I'll never be able to impress my boss. All that stuff goes away.
Yeah, it does. It does. Yep.
All right. Well, Scott, as always, it's amazing to have you on and bring us up to date on this kind of stuff. And we will shoot for doing this roughly once a week, and maybe roughly on Wednesday. And for all of you out there, I hope this was good for you. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, and all the other stuff you know how to do. And then let's have a round of applause. Oh yeah, we wouldn't be able to hear it anyway.
Yeah.
Thanks again, Scott, and to all of you.
Okay, thanks, Randy. Yep. Bye now.
It's been great talking to you.
Same here.